Hi, wee Bob here, and thankfully I am having a somewhat restful weekend. Just had my morning cup of tea with a Tunnock's tea cake, and for those that don't know what that might be, it might be worth a Google because it's a pretty good Scottish based biscuit mallow thing. This week, again, I was struggling with what to make a video about, but have a new idea that may help me moving forward. We shall see. Anyway, this week we are looking at a method that I came up with this morning all by myself, and I've decided to call it the quad try double decker method. Yes, a very nice and concise name for this new method that I've come up with. So, this method can be used in any digital art program, but today I am showing you it in Rebelle 6. To start, we make our canvas a dark grey colour, and in this case I have chosen a 4B pencil, which I don't really think matters in digital art much because of the pen pressure. But anyway, choose a pencil you like or a brush. This step is quite crucial actually, as it will determine the level of frustration you might have when doing this method, and you can always change it a bit at some points in the process. Again, this method is not meant to be rigidly followed or anything like that. It's just something that might help you get the results as you might have seen in the thumbnail. Anyway, we have our reference here, as you can see on the screen. We have a timer which I have set to 3 minutes. For all those clever ones out there, you might see where I'm going with this one, but we can choose a mid-tone grey value here, and by eye we are just sketching in the middle values that we can see on the reference as illustrated. Now we can do this by eye as I did, but perhaps you might want to take a bit of time to begin with looking at your reference and maybe even drawing out over the top of it where these highlighted areas are, where before you start sketching or before you get started. Okay, so we have a 3 minutes, and this, in my mind at least, really focuses the brain. We're not thinking which part should I start with, where should I draw. Just get those big splodgy areas down with this light grey colour and see where it goes. So 3 minutes are up and we have something that kind of looks like a face. Okay, so prepare for the next big stage, the big next step. Can't even speak. Dun dun dun. Nah, we are just going to do another 3 minutes, but with a difference, and that applies to the later stages of this process as well. For this 3 minutes, we are going to put down the darkest of dark parts. Again, looking at our reference and thinking in our brain where these are, or where these dark parts are. So we start to put down these and with almost but not quite a black value. But this one is slightly further up the value scale, only slightly, because I really want it to be quite dark. So we can add in eyebrows at this point within the 3 minutes, counting down. We don't have much time, so get on, so move on and just get those dark value splodges onto the canvas. Don't worry too much about it, just look at what you can see as I've done and try to do a similar thing with whatever your reference is. The reference really matters though, and you really need to make sure you've got a strong light source reference. Parts of our drawing may look odd to us, but again, don't overly worry about that just now, and I'll show you why a bit later. For example, I have a funky eye here, and I'm not sure about my direct depiction of my reference, but as I said, let's not worry too much about it. That is something for later on in our process. Okay, the next 3 minutes end fast, and we have added in some eyelashes and defined some parts of the face. So after 6 minutes, in my opinion, we now have something that looks more like a face. Part of the beauty of working like this, in our minds, we know what faces look like. We have our references as well, but once we have the basics of the face down, our mind can start to fill in the blanks. Whatever the object is, whether it be a motorbike or something that you've seen in real life, once we've got the basic shapes down, our mind can really hone in on what we're looking at and then start to interpret things slightly differently. And that's kind of the main forceful point of this kind of exercise. We now have more data points to work from. and to measure from and compare one against another. So the final 3 minutes, in fact, it's the second last final 3 minutes of the triple, as I was going to say. It was meant to be triple, and then I realised I'd actually did 4 sets of 3 minutes. But this is a bit of a refinement stage. We are looking at adding in the whitest of whites, the reflections on the eyes, the lips, but we're also going to get the blender out and make some of those hard edges, the hard shadows that we've created softer depending on what is required. The nostrils are really dark, but they do tend to have a transition from dark to light depending on where your light source is coming from. Therefore, after 9 minutes, we have what I think is going to help us move forward into furthering this sketch into a full-blown drawing, or at least the start of one. 9 minutes down, and my thought process at this point was, okay, let's give myself one more chance with another 3 minutes. So with the timer set for another 3 minutes, looking out into that distant future, we move into the next revision stage. At this point, I was struggling slightly with the construct of my face, and the outlines were all a bit smudgy, which was the plan, to be fair, at the beginning. I started to outline my face kind of GTA style, just to give the brain something to work with. If you're going for realism though, this is not something that you want to have. You don't want to have bold lines, because we don't see people walking around with solid black outlines on their bodies. We don't see them with big nostril shapes and outlines of their nose and outlines of their arms, because that would be a bit odd. Something from the X-Files perhaps. However, a bit like colouring book, this gives me a guide for my mind at least to use. The main push on this 3 minutes was the detail of the eyes and generally just trying to spruce up the base sketch that we had. We are now 12 minutes into this drawing, and I have to say I am happy personally with where I am. We now get on to the first 10-minute part, and quickly I realise that my head is not quite tilted to where it should be. Therefore, using the magic of digital art selections, we can rotate this to where we think it should be, as illustrated, and then continue on. A lot of the time when drawing these types of timed goals, I think it really focuses the brain. When we see the results, we get inspiration to carry on. This does not always happen, as many of my initial sketches really suck, and I haven't really been using a method like this, and I get dismayed and I give up. I've got a few drawings part way through currently that I've lost momentum, and although I try to get back to them, I find myself not doing much with them, spending many hours looking at references, what am I going to do, thinking in my brain, as the initial spark that was there has grown dim. Part of this can be to do with interruptions or things going on in life, your work, your family coming in. My daughter just wants to hoover at the moment because that's her chore for the day, but I said to her, can you hold on to do this voiceover thing? Anyway, but that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. Somebody comes in, you distract your brain from what you are doing, or you've got work and overtime and all this sorts of things going on in your brain. But I'm going to try this method on some of those drawings, see where we get to in the end of things. Now I'll bring that to you in a later video, hopefully. If this tutorial so far has been of use to you, I would really appreciate if you can hit the like button. That's all I'm going to say on that. The 10-minute goal, which is a good bit longer, allows us to slow down and just enjoy the painting process more. We start by removing the GTA lines and replace them with the highlights that the reference tells us are there. The great thing about a process like this is that it can really teach us to look at references, and especially with grayscale and black and white photographs, as they would commonly be called, we can see how 3D shapes are formed from light and shadow. It trains our eye to look at objects in a different manner, or at least for some of us it will. This is why such studies as the planes of the face will help us as we start to slowly build up an understanding of the human skull. And this applies to all anatomy, and this is where I need to expand into other aspects of drawing, the hands, the arms, just to get that knowledge, that base knowledge down. A method like this applied to arms, for example, will really help, and I think it will really help myself, and I'm going to really try to apply it moving forward. If you look at the cheekbone, for example, due to the shape of the cheekbone, we see the light hit the top surface, the one that's most furthest away from the eye, of a particular face. Eyeballs are called eyeballs because they're the shape of a ball or a sphere. So again, we should think about how the ball shape under that skin will affect the surface around the eye. We end up with an inherent ball shape. We end up with the skin coming out around the surface of the sphere. The blender brush in any digital program can help us smooth out those transitions where needed, but we do need hard shadow boundaries as well as the soft transitions, unless you're going for a particularly stylized look to your painting. With some aspects of this drawing, due to the time constraint that I was putting on myself, I did make mistakes around trying to follow my reference too closely, rather than looking at what I have learned over many years of self-study. And we sometimes need to deviate from our reference, as the way that we have drawn a particular part of the face might be slightly further turned from what the reference is, or from what you've drawn is different from what the reference is showing. And you might not see as much of the eyeball as your reference shows it to be because you've turned it through your drawing process. This is where I had some trouble with the eye that is visible in this drawing. I at some points had been trying to copy the reference too much. Just be mindful of this, and you need to make a decision. Either use your artistic knowledge to draw what you know should be able to be seen, or base your drawing on the exact reference, but a lot of alterations may be required to tweak parts of your facial structure or the anatomy to get it to look proper. What we did in the first and second set of 3 minutes, we are now doing on a much more detailed basis. It is just light and dark splodges, but we now have other face elements to bring context to what we are seeing. So here we are, 22 minutes into painting, and again, the progress to this point hopefully will keep the fire lit and inspire us to keep going. I'm happy with the general results, and I want to make it better. I've got a desire to make it better. I'm looking at it going, yes, this is where I want to be, and it pushes me onwards. So let's add in our final 10 minutes. But with this 10 minutes, we wanted to see how our mind had worked. How did our brain interpret the reference to what we have drawn? And this really only applies, obviously, if you've done it by eye. This is where Rebelle 6 really helps us, as we can use a reference image guide tool with our reference to see how our mind has interpreted things. You can also do this with other programs like Sketchbook by importing a reference image into a new layer and lowering the opacity, then resizing it to similar to what you've drawn and see how it compares. Here we see me bringing in the reference to Rebelle 6 and resizing it approximately to what I have drawn, but we will never fit all the features as our mind will interpret things incorrectly sometimes. We add in guides, and this helps us to see that in my case I have way too much forehead shown in comparison to the reference. The side of the face is too far back as well, as the guide shows us. Now we could use these to begin with, and a few of my recent paintings have used this feature just to give me a guide to where I want things to go. I don't like using it overly because I want my own interpretation of a face to come through, as well as trying to look at the reference and bring that to the image that I'm trying to create. We can make a duplicate of our layer at this point, so if you're 20 odd minutes in, just copy and paste your layer, duplicate your layer, so that we can compare the original and then compare 10 minutes of change, which can again be quite an inspiration when you see 10 minutes can make me go from this point to this point, so just another 10 minutes makes a big difference. And obviously that will decrease as your painting comes into focus. In this example, we immediately delete the extra forehead that I had drawn, and we work on refining the nose shape and the position of the eyes. We refine all these little areas to give a better presentation of our reference, darken where the jawbone connects to the skull, and these types of exercises really do help with thinking about values, as I have already stated. At this stage, the cheekbone is very prominent due to the difference in value from the lower edge to the highlighted upper side of the cheekbone. A reference, this value change is a lot more subtle, so you can see a very soft transition. So after all these refinements, we can compare all the points of our painting, or the quad tri double decker, which I think I might just change to Weebob's 12-20 method. So you do 12 minutes and then 20 minutes, or you break that 12 and 20 up into whatever you want it to be. Whatever works for you. As you can see from our basic sketch and setting our time limits out, then refining, we get to a point where, in my mind, I've got a pretty cool portrait to move forward with into a bigger painting. Some of my paintings, I've said, usually take a minimum of about 3 hours, and perhaps even up as much as 15-20 hours, sometimes even longer. I do cover talking about other portrait drawings and how to draw other portraits in this video in the corner that you might be interested in. Thanks for watching, and Weebob is out.